Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and we have someone that knew Maven Brodie before she was Maven Brodie, and it's Liz Shropshire. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and your organization is Peace Through Music International.
Yes.
And so we'll get your story, but just to let everybody know quickly that Maven, her last year at college at BYU Hawaii, met you because there was some sort of program she hopped on to do some extracurricular stuff, and she got some training and then you guys went to what country?
Kosovo.
So Maven got to go to Kosovo. So I've told Maven that she's one of the bravest people I know because she lived in India for a little while. She went to Japan for something that she did in school, I think, as well, and did the public bathhouse. And so there's lots of stuff in Maven's life that impresses me.
She's really an awesome person. She really is. And it was so fun. What she did with BYU Hawaii is an internship with our program. And so she and a group of, I think, 8 others or 9 others came to Kosovo and helped in our programs, teaching and playing with the kids and helping create things for the program. And it was awesome. She really stands out in a group because she just is a natural leader. She's really awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, you didn't spend any more than like 3 months with her altogether, right?
Right.
And her recollection is that she was trained, she did her stuff, and she only saw you every now and then, right?
Yes, that's right.
But she was very impressed by you, and I guess vice versa, right? You were impressed by her as well.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, tell us a little bit about maybe about 5 minutes of your growing up and where you lived and what your life was like as a kid.
Sure. My father was an aviator in the Navy, so we lived all over the U.S., mostly in Southern California. He was in Vietnam, and he was flying off of aircraft carriers, so he'd be gone for like 9 months a year. I didn't really know him growing up, and I think it really impacted me. I think that's probably why I do what I do. I was always afraid for him, and he was a squadron commander, so he was making decisions that were life and death decisions for people in his squadron, and it really impacted him. So when he would come home, he wasn't this fun dad that would take us to go out and do stuff and throw the football and play baseball and things. He just needed to decompress. And so when he would be home, we had to be quiet. And it was very different from most of my friends whose fathers were in the military, and they would come home and go do all these things. But as a kid, I had no idea what he was really doing. Knowing it now as an adult, I can't even imagine the stress that he was under and the PTSD that he dealt with. So that was my growing up. Grew up everywhere, mostly Coronado in San Diego, but
and so did you have like a ward with other service children?
Well, so my father was not a member of the church. My mom was. We were not very active when I was a kid. We went to primary, but we only went to, that was when it was during the week, and we only went to Sunday church sometimes. And it was kind of hard because we always lived at least a half hour away from the church, and there were not many other military families, if any. And we were always labeled a transient family. And so people didn't necessarily want to get to know us. We didn't really feel like we fit in. That was when I was a child. And then when I was 12 years old, I decided that I wanted to be in the church, and I would have people come pick me up and take me to the Sunday services. And then it changed. Then I was very welcomed. And then as my family started coming, they were very welcomed. And then my dad joined the church when we lived in Florida, and it was just totally different, where we were really an involved family. But as a child, it was pretty hard. Yeah, we need to be careful about putting labels on families, even if they are transient, even if they might get moved by the military next month, you know.
Still should love and support them all you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, and get to know them and make them feel welcome.
And do you remember learning the Articles of Faith?
Oh, yes.
Were
Yes.
you good at it?
Oh, yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I couldn't. I just couldn't remember things, back then.
I
I
made this, like, I think it was like a bandolo or something. I can't remember. And you got like a patch for each. No, it wasn't a bandolo. It was like a thing that you would hang, you got these little you put on these like things that stuck on it, and then you had to embroider on the bottom.
like
Think
maybe Elmer's glue. You'd put Elmer's glue,
Yeah,
and
and
it'd
I
be
think
like,
the guys got a bandolo, and I was very jealous of that because all I got was this wall hanging. But I loved learning the Articles of Faith to get that, and that's when I became converted to the gospel. Was when I was in those last 2 years of primary. I was the only person in my class, and my mom was my teacher. But we would drive 30 minutes to get to the church for primary because we had to pick up other kids that we were living in Coronado, California, and our church was in Imperial Beach. So we'd go pick up all the other kids, and then we'd go to primary, and my younger brothers were there too. And then I'd have class with my mom. And I used to say to her, can't we just stay home and do this? And she'd say, no, we really can't. But it was that and meeting all the requirements to graduate primary. I had to attend church 80%, I think, of the time. And that was when I realized how different I felt on the Sundays that I didn't go to church than I did on the Sundays I did go to church. And so that's when I decided I really wanted to be in the church and active in the church and have it be a big part of my life.
And then as a in the young women's program, you were living in Coronado still.
First in Coronado, then in Pensacola, Florida, then in Jacksonville, Florida. So I went to 3 different high schools. It was not a very fun teenage years, but I did make some great friends, and I wouldn't trade it for that.
I visited all 3 of those places on vacation.
Awesome. They're great places, all of them.
When we went to Pensacola, our family was doing a trip around the United States. We drove 11,000 miles in 45 days. We had a van and a 13-foot trailer. And when we got to Pensacola Beach, we were from California. The water is kind of gray. I mean, green,
Oh, yeah. And the
and
sand is
not,
kind of brownish.
the sand is brown. But at Pensacola, it's like white sand and
Yes.
blue water. And we thought, they're making this up. This is not real.
Yeah, it is crazy. And you could see like flying fish would come because the water was so clear, and a whole bunch of flying fish would come and keep coming closer, and they drop off. And then by the time they got to you, there might be just one little fish. But I loved Pensacola. And my dad was the commanding officer of that naval base. That's the
Wow.
base where they train the pilots. So that was kind of a fun experience.
And were you like president of the Maya Maids or anything?
No, I never got to be president. I always wanted to be, but I was a transient family.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I got to be a counselor once, I think, but that was about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I was Teachers Quorum president, there were 24 names on the roll of our quorum, and half of them were inactive. But it only takes a couple of teachers to set up the sacrament, so we only had like one assignment every month to do the bread and stuff like that and set everything up. Back in the day, and now in our stake, there's only 2 of the original 6 wards left in that same geographic area, and we have brought in Alameda and some other places to fill it up a little bit.
It's happening in Los Angeles too. It's really sad to see.
Yeah. And so as you're approaching graduate, and so in high school, you did music in high school?
Oh yeah, music and sports. Those are my 2 things.
That's right, sports. Yeah. So you played softball.
Softball was my main sport. So I always played high school softball, and then I did music and band. And so I did band in the fall, marching band and all of that. And then I did softball in the spring. One of my high schools didn't have a marching band, so I played volleyball there. But mostly it was softball and band. Those were my loves.
Yeah, I love to play sports in the church programs. and so I can relate with that. But I was afraid to do music and to perform and do stuff like that, so I chickened out for those things.
Well, it was an amazing experience for me. The very first time I went into band in fourth grade, it was like a part of me knew I was home. And I decided right then and there when I grew up, I wanted to be a music teacher. And I didn't even major in music education. I totally switched and became a composer. But my dad kept saying to me, Liz, you're a teacher. And sure enough, that's my life. I'm a teacher.
Yeah, and so as you're approaching graduation, you apply to schools. What schools did you apply to? Colleges?
Well, we had a rule in my family that you had to stay home for your first year. So I went to community college my first year, which was actually a great experience. I loved it. We had a great young adult group that was in Jacksonville, Florida. And it was amazing. We had to drive an hour and a half to get to Institute, and we all went anyway. We had firesides every Sunday, activities every weekend. It was an amazing group of people, an amazing group of friends. We're still friends. But then afterwards, when I could apply to other schools, I wanted to go to Berkeley. That was my dream school. But my parents said, we will pay for your school if you go to a Florida State school or to BYU. Those were my choices. So because I'd moved so much, I thought, I'll go to BYU. I'll have friends there. Never occurred to me to just try to pay my own way and go to Berkeley. I don't know. I was young for my grade. Maybe that's why, I don't know. But I think about it, how different my life would have been if I had gone to Berkeley.
So did you apply to Berkeley and get
No.
accepted, but just didn't go? So you just decided not to apply?
Yeah, I mean, there was no point because
Right.
my parents, they had X amount of dollars and they said, we will pay for you to go to college, but you can go to BYU or you can go to a state school. And by the way, Berkeley wasn't even, I did try to talk them into Berkeley, but that wasn't even a consideration. And it would have been an out-of-state school. It would have been really expensive.
Up in Boston?
No, the
Oh,
Berkeley in California.
oh, California, Berkeley. Okay.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the
So
College of Music, though.
no, I didn't even know about that then. No,
Yeah,
I wanted to go to Cal Berkeley because I'm a hippie at heart, and it just really appealed to me.
just like me.
Yeah,
I was on Cal's campus earlier this spring.
that's so great. I
Just
love that
walking around.
community. I used to go there to visit and just go to all the used bookstores, and I mean, I just love that town.
Yeah, I happened to hold the first down marker with the chain crew for Stanford football. And the Stanford band, had a reputation for running around and doing their own thing.
Yes.
And the Berkeley band was very staid and professional. And, they each thought they were better in their own way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's fun to have rivals
Rivals,
in
that's right.
college. In college,
That's
not in
right.
life. In life, that's not good.
And so at BYU, you did composition,
I did composition and music theory. So
music theory.
when I first went to college, I was going to be a music education major and I was going to teach band and coach softball. That was my bringing the worlds together. And then one summer before I left for BYU, I was asked to arrange music for a play. And so I spent the summer arranging music and then for this little orchestra and choir. And I absolutely loved it more than I'd loved anything I'd ever done before. I slept maybe 2 to 3 hours a night for the whole summer. I had a job and I used to fall asleep at work all the time. Like I would wake up when my pencil would hit the ground, that kind of thing. But as soon as I got home from work, I'd be writing music and going to rehearsals. And so I went to BYU and I said, I want to be an arranging major. That's what I want to do, is arrange music. And they said, well, there's no such thing as an arranging major, but you can be a composition major. So I did that. And I loved it. I had some great professors at BYU. It was a great experience. And then what I would do is I'd go to BYU and I'd take all my music classes, and then I'd go back home to Florida and take my GED classes at the community college. So I didn't have to waste my time at BYU because I wanted to take physics of sound and sound recording and all these extra classes. And so it was.
That's right. It's in a way, it's a good thing that you had music as an interest, because Peace through Softball International just doesn't have the same ring to
No,
it.
it really doesn't. There's a basketball without borders, but I don't know if softball without borders would work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
No,
basketball is
and
big.
music really was the thing softball still is like a home for me in a certain way. But music does something to my soul, and what it does for healing these kids is so phenomenal. And being able to use music that way has been honestly the greatest privilege of my life.
Yeah. So you graduate from BYU, and do you do more school at BYU?
No, I went on a mission. I went to Nova
Okay.
Scotia. Yeah.
Nova Scotia.
And then at the end of my mission, I said to Heavenly Father, I've never been happier than I was on my mission. And actually, I should backtrack. When I was at BYU, I kept going back and forth between social work and music because I kept being so pulled to social work or psychology. I kept feeling like I could do more good in that, but I just kept feeling like I should stay in music. So at the end of my mission, I said to Heavenly Father, I really think I should become a social worker. And I felt like I got the strongest answer to my prayers I'd ever gotten up to that point, that I should stay in music. But I had realized that I didn't like writing intellectual music. I liked writing music that sounded good, that was fun. And I was very drawn to film music. So I applied to go to USC, University of Southern California, in their film scoring program. And it was called Composition for the Music Industry. And I applied for University of North Texas and McGill and some other places. But my number one, and I applied for USC for the regular composition program. But my number one choice was this Composition for the Music program. And I got in. Only 12 people were accepted, only 6 from the US, 6 from other countries. It was really an amazing thing that I even got accepted into that program. It was 1 year of 36 grad hours. We had recording sessions every Monday. I've never been through anything as amazing as that program. It was
quite a hands-on thing, huh?
Oh, it was. They told us at the beginning, they said, you can't do anything else while you're in this program. You can't work, you can't date, you can't, don't plan on doing anything. Excuse me, my mouth's dry. And I was probably the only person in our group that had something else going on because I went to church on Sunday. And so every once in a while, our little branch, everybody, the USC branch, everybody was in grad school or a really tough undergrad. So we didn't have tons of parties, but we did have like family home evening and stuff like that. And every once in a while, there'd be something going on, and I'd invite the guys from my program and they would come. And so that was like a social outlet.
So did going on your mission to Nova Scotia, did that impact, or was that just before you graduated from BYU?
I wanted to go before I graduated. My parents said that they wouldn't pay for my school or my mission if I did that. My dad still wasn't a member of the church. He was very against me going on a mission. So I graduated, and then I went on a mission. I sold everything I had, and then the night before my mission, my dad came up to me and said, I'm going to pay for your mission, right? So it's great, but it was also really nice because I got to make some big sacrifices to go on my mission. I mean, he picked up when my money ran out because I didn't own enough to make very much money in what I sold. So it was really great because I knew I'd made a sacrifice to get there. And I also knew I had my dad behind me. And honestly, of all the choices I've made in my life, going on a mission was probably the best decision. It set me up for my life. The things I learned, the changes I made in myself were so profound. And I recommend that to anybody.
Right. And did you get accepted to USC and then do a mission deferral?
No, I didn't apply.
Okay.
So I came home from BYU. I was actually working in a Catholic church. I was the music director in a Catholic church and had the kids singing primary songs and songs out of the Catholic hymnals and stuff. And when I went on my mission, they actually came and sang at my Mormon missionary farewell, and they sang for the primary. It was very, very cool. It was really awesome. I used to say I was the only Mormon missionary who had a whole Catholic congregation praying for their success, because they really welcomed me, and it was a really awesome experience.
Cool.
So then I decided to go on a mission, and so I graduated in August, and I went on my mission in March, the following March.
Yeah, that was almost like religious peace through music that you started a little bit, my.
Well, and it was a really neat experience because my dad had decided that he wanted to go back to church, to his church. So every Sunday I would go to the Baptist church with him. Then I would go to the Mormon church. Then I would go to, I'm sorry for saying Mormon. And then I would go to the Catholic church and do my job. And it was so great because back to back, I had these 3 church services and I felt the spirit in every one of them. And it was such an amazing experience for me to get to do that. I'm so glad I was able to do that.
Yeah, and it does make sense because most grad students do something in the world in real life anyway. I mean, a lot of them do.
Yeah.
And so your mission in a way was part of getting accepted at USC.
Yes. Yes,
It
I
was an
think so.
extracurricular activity that you did that
Yes.
contributed to being accepted.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there were only 2 girls, the rest were guys. Uh, only 6 of us were from the US. It was crazy. It was really awesome. It was the hardest academic thing I've ever done. But I learned more in that 1 year than I learned in all my years before that. And the things that I learned were exactly what I needed to be able to set up this foundation, to be able to write arrangements for crazy instrumentation that we have with these kids, being able to hear a song and just take it down and write it out and make it into an arrangement with no time. Yeah, it was really good for me.
Did you have music industry or movie industry composers that were heroes or that you wanted to pattern some of the things you did?
Oh yeah, I was a huge John Williams fan.
John
I
Williams.
Yeah, I became a Jerry Goldsmith fan. Bruce Broughton was one of my teachers. I'm a fan of his. Um, yeah, I mean, I to this day love film music, and when I watch a movie, that's one of the things that I'm most aware of is the music. And I've seen movies that could have been so much better if they had better music, and then I've seen movies that would not have been nearly as good without the great music that it had. So it's a fun thing to be aware of, and it's a skill that I've really used a lot. Uh, in arranging and writing and making things fit, because that's what film music is about, is making things fit into a small space and to sync up exactly where you need them to be.
What do you think about Danny Elfman?
I think he's awesome. I met him a few times. Yeah.
That's
Yeah, in the
cool.
recording studio. Yeah, I actually did some work for a woman who did ghostwriting for him. And
Okay.
so I was in the recording studio, and yeah, I got to meet him a few times. He was fun. He
Yeah.
carried this little keyboard with him.
All his work with Tim, what's his name? The director. I think it's
Oh, Tim Burton.
Tim Burton, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
his music is like classical and fun and
Yes.
exciting. And so I that's
He has
so
really grown as a composer. It's been really fun to see.
now I think I take John Williams for granted, right? Like, okay, he's classical, he's got the big orchestra, uh, Star Wars, of course. It was
Harry Potter,
everything he's done since then is like
Jaws. Yeah.
he just does it in his sleep, right?
Yeah. Well, he has a lot of orchestrators and other people, but really, as far as making a mark on the earth, I mean, I think it was a little 45 of Jaws. I had the Rockford Files. He did that. I had
Right.
all the early stuff. I used to listen to it all the time as a kid
Did
or
you have it
teenager.
on cassette tape and it would be traveling music?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And after you graduate from there, what do you do professionally?
I tried to work in the movie industry. It takes about 12 years to make it in the movie industry. So I had paying jobs like refiling or data entry, that kind of stuff. And then I would just get little jobs like commercials, or I worked for the Jewish television network for a little while. I did just whatever I could. Uh, to keep money coming in and keep working in that field. But finally, I did it for about 4 years, and then I just couldn't keep doing it. My cards were maxed out. I was, my parents were having to bail me out all the time. It was just not good. So I took a job teaching emotionally disturbed children, EDD kids, and as a teacher's aide. And then I became a full-time teacher with those kids for a few years. And I thought, oh, teaching is so great because I'll be done at 3:00 and then I'll be able to write, all the rest of the time. But I wanted to, I'm always drawn to troubled kids, and teaching those kids, you don't go home and leave it at the school. You carry it with you. So a lot of my students were in gangs and had killed people and were in and out of jail all year, and prostitutes. And so you come home, but you still worry about them all night. And you think about, what can I say? What can I do? So I found that it was not the job I thought it was going to be, but it was fabulous for me because I got all kinds of training. that really has helped me. And my first school I taught at, the kids were very violent. We had to break up a lot of fights, and they would threaten my life. And it was hard working there. But then I transferred to another school where they weren't allowed to threaten your life, and they weren't allowed to be quite as violent and things. And so that was nice. I got to be there for a few years. And then one of the other teachers said to me, I'd like you to teach my daughter's piano. And I said, I'm not a piano teacher. And she said, yes, you are. She said, you're a teacher, you're a really good teacher, and you play the piano. So why aren't you teaching piano? So I said, okay, I'll try it, but I don't know if I'll be any good at it. So I started teaching her kids, and then they started referring me to other people. And
so you got a reputation.
I ended up teaching so much privately that sort of started taking over my life. And of course, I made a lot more money teaching privately than I was making teaching school, because these are, the neediest students. So of course they pay the teachers the least. And anyway.
But you're mixing your music work with social work back to.
Yeah. So it was pretty neat. And then I was also taking a music program into some Catholic elementary schools where I would take band instruments in, and the kids could rent them. And then I would teach band and also piano in the Catholic schools. I was in 4 Catholic elementary schools. So that's what I was doing full time. I was doing all of that, making very good money. My dad was very happy because I was finally making a good living and out of debt and doing great. And then in 1999, I was driving to the home of one of my piano students, listening to NPR, and I heard about the war in Kosovo and what was happening there, and that the women and children, what I heard was this story that I heard over and over again after I got there, that the women were being interviewed in these camps in other countries that they'd had to walk to, and they told the story of how they'd been in their village, and the Serbian army or the paramilitaries or the police had come in, separated the women and men, and made the women and children leave and walk to another country. The men and the older boys were gathered up and taken away. Well, many times they were killed right there, but when they weren't killed, then they were taken off and put into prison. And so these women and children ended up in these refugee camps made of tents and just horrific conditions. And there wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough water, they were living in other countries. And meanwhile, there was no communication. All of their personal identification had been taken from them, and they had no way to find out what had happened to their husbands and their sons. So they were living in this limbo, trying to protect their children while being incredibly traumatized themselves. And I had planned a trip to go to Switzerland that summer to go backpacking. And so I had a plane ticket. I'd gotten this ticket on an amazing deal, and it worked out well. So what happened is, I had this plane ticket to go to Europe. I was going to go backpacking through Switzerland and Austria. I heard this radio program, and I thought to myself, Kosovo's in Europe. Europe is small. How far away can it be from Switzerland, I can just take a train and get there and just do this instead of going on holiday. So I went to this piano student's house, and the piano student was a celebrity family. And so they had a nanny, and the kids were involved in all kinds of activities. So a lot of times I spent more time with the nanny than I did with the actual children. And so I was talking to the nanny. She was from Europe. And I said, do you know where Kosovo is? I'm thinking about doing this. And we just talked about it. So I went home, found this volunteer group through the Volunteers for Peace website, and it was called the Balkan Sunflowers. And they were a German-based hippie group where you paid your way to get to the country. Well, you had to apply. If they accepted you, you paid your way to get to the country, gave them some money after you arrived to cover your living expenses, and then you lived with whichever group they assigned you to, and then worked with the children. And they were, I thought I'd be helping women carry water, teaching children about staying away from landmines, that kind of thing.
Survival skills.
And I went back to the same family the next week, and the nanny said to me, are you going to go to Kosovo? And I said, yes, I found this volunteer group. They accepted me. I'm going to go. And she said, well, my husband and I want to give you some money to help you pay for this. And I said, oh, no, that's not what this is about. I'm doing this just instead of going on vacation. It won't cost me any more than it would have cost me to go on vacation. I had no idea what I was talking about with pretty much everything that first trip. So she said, no, my husband and I have been watching TV, listening to the radio, and we want to go too, and we can't go. So let us give you some money so it's as if we're going with you. I said, well, let me think about that, because that's totally different from what I have planned. So I went home, and I was talking to my next door neighbor, who was a really good friend of mine from the singles ward. Actually, we'd known each other for years. And I said, I don't want to take money from people. That's not what this is about. And she said, Liz, don't be stupid. Don't just go to go. Do what you do best and take a music program to those kids. So my friends from the singles ward, my friends from the other groups started doing fundraising. I started contacting music instrument manufacturers, and I ended up going with about $5,000 worth of musical instruments. And the instruments that I chose were the penny whistle and the harmonica. Let's see, I should have a penny whistle right here. Here's a penny whistle. It has 6 holes, really easy to play, because as you lift your finger up, you go up a step. So that's do, re, mi, fa, so like that. Harmonica, of course, very, very easy to play. The reason I chose these instruments is twofold, because one is that anyone can play them if they have 2 arms. If they have 1 arm, they can play a harmonica. I hate it that some kids can't play either instrument.
That's right. They're lightweight.
But they're lightweight. And best of all, or most important of all at the time, is that these kids were all living in refugee camps. And at some point, they were going to have to leave and either try walking back into Kosovo, where everything was being taken from them, or walk to another country where they also weren't safe. And so I wanted to have something small enough that they could put it in their pocket and hide it, and no one had to even know that they had it. So I went to Kosovo. Do you want me to just keep going with the story?
Yeah.
Okay, so I went to Kosovo. That was August of 1999. The war had ended the month before, and people were streaming back into Kosovo from these refugee camps in other countries. But most people, their home was destroyed. So when they went home, they couldn't move back in their home. So they either lived like 10 families to one home, or one family, but they had a tent in their backyard while they were rebuilding their homes, or they would live in an IDP camp, an internally displaced person camp. And that's just a camp inside of your own country. A good example would be when the Hurricane Katrina hit and people in New Orleans lost their homes. They lived in a stadium for a while. That stadium was an IDP camp. And so we have IDP camps all over the world with refugees living in them because they can't live in their home for various reasons. So people were living in schools, in factories, in churches, any place that had 4 walls and a ceiling. The big communities were living there just to be safe until they could move back to their village or rebuild a home somewhere. And so I went and got there, and everything had been destroyed in Kosovo, the streets, the buildings, everything. And the first camp that I went into was a brick factory. And this brick factory had 350 people living in it. It was made of brick, but there were windows, but they were just holes in the brick. There was nothing, there was no glass or anything. So people had hung blankets up there to try to protect from the sun and from the flies. You've never seen flies until you've been in a refugee camp or one of these camps. It's really, really hard. They had one spigot of water for 350 people, and they had outdoor toilets that got emptied sometimes. So I went to this camp. I took a volleyball because I'd been warned by the volunteer group I was with, don't expect the kids to like sit down and let you teach them. These kids are wild. They've all been living in camps for a while in other countries. Some of them were living in the woods before the war even ended, and before they even got to leave the country and go to live in a camp. So they have no structure in their life. There were weapons everywhere. I'd see kids playing with real guns. I'd see them making guns out of things. So I took the volleyball. And the first day I go to the camp, all the kids are there and they're all fighting. They're just fighting. That's what they were doing. They're playing and then fighting. So I got my volleyball. I go and they all gather around me. And so we start playing a game with the volleyball. And less than 3 minutes later, they're back to fighting. So I grabbed the ball and I said, stop fighting or I'm going to take my ball and go home. Of course, I'm speaking English. They speak Albanian. I have no idea what they thought I was actually saying to them. So we play for a few minutes more and then they fight. And I grab the ball and say, no more fighting, only nice. Kept doing this for about hour and a half. And then finally, I said, okay, I'm going to take the ball and go home. I'll come back tomorrow. We'll see if you can go longer without trying to kill each other. As I went to leave, one of the women in the camp ran out and grabbed my hand and walked me around the camp, giving me a tour in Albanian, but with lots of signs so I could kind of understand what she was saying to me. And she took me back to her room in the camp, this brick room that was holding a number of people to sleep there and to live there. And all these women had gathered in this room because they were wondering what this crazy lady was doing out there with all the kids. Because the women, in their culture, they wouldn't be out playing with the kids, but especially the women were so traumatized that they were just dealing with their trauma and the other women's traumas. The teenage girls weren't allowed to go outside because they weren't allowed to socialize and to be doing that. These were people that had lived in villages, and so they were living a much more conservative life, and so the teenage girls weren't just allowed to go out and things. Do you have a question? Wait, you're muted.
Was religion part of the war? Was there
So,
Christians versus Muslims, or what was it?
yes. So Kosovo is a Muslim country, but only because Turkey conquered it and forced everyone to become Muslim. About 20% of the population maintained their Christianity, Catholicism. So Kosovo is one of the areas that the Apostle Paul went when he talks about going to the people in Macedonia and the amazing reception he got there. So it's completely Christian. Then the Turks come, and if you don't at least act Muslim, you get killed. So the people become Muslim, but they don't really, it's been forced on them. They don't really love it. And then communism comes. And so then they're even farther away from religion. And so by the time this war happened, the Serbs, who are Serbian Orthodox, which is the same family as Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, they met in churches. They used religion as a weapon, saying these Albanians don't deserve to live. They would kill a baby and carve Jesus's name in it. They used religion they used Christianity in the worst way that you could possibly use it. But it was never about religion. It was about who got to have control of the country of Kosovo. And just like all wars where religion's involved, it's not really about religion. Religion is just used as a weapon. So
the women had taken you.
The women had taken me in, and they pretty much became my family. They told me about their lives before the war, their lives during the war. And then I started noticing these teenage girls in the background and how they weren't really being allowed to do anything. They would just kind of huddle up and talk all day. And so,
did you have a translator, or did some speak broken English?
there was a 17-year-old girl living in the camp who spoke English. She was a widow. She was actually 18, I think, at that point. She was a widow, amazing woman named Zanepa. And she was not allowed to go out of the camp because her husband had died. And so her mother-in-law, anyway, I could go into lots of details about the lifestyle. It was very much Old Testament, even New Testament, Jesus times kind of lifestyle, where if the woman's husband dies, then his family gets to control her. So it was very much like that. So she had no freedom, but she could stay in the camp with me and help me translate. So she translated all the classes in the camp, especially with the women, but also with the kids. So I would go to the camp every day, and then I was teaching the women some English, and they were telling me about their lives, and I was playing with the kids with the volleyball. And then once I noticed these teenage girls and that they had nothing to do, I started a class with them. And I taught them penny whistle. Well, then the younger girls started coming to me and asking me to teach them. So I taught them a harmonica class. Well, then every time I came into the camp, the boys were all over me. Lisa, musica, musica. And I said, no way, I'm not going to do anything where I ask you to sit down and listen to me. And they'd say, no, we won't fight. We promise. I said, every day you promise me you won't fight. And every day you try to kill each other. So finally, one day I'm walking to the camp. It was about a 45-minute walk. And as I'm going in the gates to the camp, all the boys gather up and circle me, and they start doing this. And what they were doing is they were gathering their tears. See if I can show it better. They were gathering their tears to give to me. Let me back up. So they did this. This was the motion. They gathered their tears, and then they presented them to me. And I said, okay, if you promise me that you'll be good, that you won't talk when I'm not talking, when I'm talking, you won't talk when I'm talking, you won't fight, and that you'll practice, then I will teach you a class. And those boys ended up becoming the best class I've ever taught in my entire life. If one of the guys started talking during class, the other boys would physically jump on him to stop him from talking so that I didn't stop class. And if I heard harmonica when I was in town, it was always one of those boys. They carried them with them everywhere they went. And what happened was this camp that had been so full of sadness and trauma. I mean, there were women that couldn't even talk. There were women that cried 24/7. I remember there was one woman that would just rock back and forward all the time.
Catatonic.
There were so many, what?
Like catatonic.
Yeah, there were so many horrible things that happened in this war. And to have this camp become a place with all this joy, the kids singing songs and playing their instruments and excited to practice. You know, every day I met with them 6 days a week, and every day they were given homework. And it wasn't beautiful music. Our harmonicas were in the key of C, and our penny whistles were in the key of D, which means when they're played at the same time, it kind of sounds like this. But it was amazing. And then the other group that I worked with was at a school. So the Albanians hadn't been allowed to go to school. So they would all gather. They were allowed to use one building, and they would gather and have 200 children in a class 2 hours a day. And so this would go on all day. So after the war ended, that one school was where all the kids gathered that weren't living in a camp, that were living in a tent in their backyard or whatever. And so I went to this school, and the kids were playing volleyball. Save the Children had a volleyball program going on. So I noticed some kids standing off to the side. So I went up to those kids and I said, would you guys like to have a music class? And they said, sure. Well, that was Monday. We had our first class that Monday. By Friday, I was teaching 5 classes a day, 6 days a week at that school with up to 90 students in each of those classes, 4 classes a day, 6 days a week at the camp every day. And it was amazing. It was so phenomenal. It was an amazing time to be in Kosovo because people were finding out who was alive and who had survived the war. So like you'd see 2 cars going down the street, one going this way and one going this way. I don't know how to make it look good. They were coming against, and they'd stop in the middle of the road and they would have a conversation asking who had survived the war. And nobody minded. Nobody minded having to wait an hour for them to have their conversation because everyone knew what was going on. And so there was this amazing trauma and also this amazing joy when they would find out that someone was still alive. It was phenomenal. And so I was supposed to stay for 3 weeks. I changed my ticket and stayed for 6 weeks. But at the end of the 6 weeks, I had maxed out all my credit cards, spent all my savings. I had to pay my rent on my apartment in Los Angeles. My jobs in LA were saying, we love what you're doing, but we have to fire you if you don't come back. So I had to leave. And when I went to tell these kids that I was leaving, they started to cry. Now, I had seen these kids. This is the kids in the school. I had seen children attack adults. I'd seen all kinds of stuff. It was crazy, but I'd never seen them cry. And they started crying when I told them I had to leave. And they said, Liz, you can't take this away from us. There are groups here that are rebuilding our homes, groups that are giving us food, and we're so grateful for that. But this is the only thing for us, and you can't take it away. So I said, okay, I promise you I will come back. I said, I don't know how, but I promise you I will come back to you. So I left. I left all my stuff in Kosovo, went back to Los Angeles. I was giving a fireside to some of the people that had helped raise money for this. And at the end of the fireside, I just said, I don't know how, but I've got to get back to these kids. And so after the fireside, a woman approached me and said, Liz, if you would like to start a nonprofit, I'll be your accountant. And another woman volunteered to be the lawyer, and they went off and did the paperwork and founded the Shropshire Music Foundation, which then became Peace Through Music International. And we've been going for 25 years now. This is our 25th anniversary. And it's so amazing because we're only able to do this because of all the amazing volunteers. So I told you about the 18-year-old widow that was helping me in the camps. Well, in the school, here I am teaching 200 kids at a time, 90 kids at a time, 100 kids at a time. And I'm teaching on a chalkboard that has bullet holes in it, that is bent, and that those old chalkboards that would work sometimes and not work other times. Mm-hmm. So like you try to write something and then you can't write and then you write. So I'm teaching,
like waxy or something.
Yes, exactly. So I'm jumping up and down and I'm counting and I'm clapping and I'm making all these hand motions and stuff. And after about a week, a 12-year-old girl named Erblina came to me and said, Liz, I actually speak some English. Would you like me to translate for you? And I said, yes, please translate for me. So she translated all of my classes that summer, even went out to the camp to help. She got people that were able to live in their homes to help the people that were still living in the camp. And so we got all these great things going through donations of Kosovars, giving to other Kosovars. And then at the end of the summer, I left, went back home, started the foundation, and then I got back to Kosovo. And so I got back to Kosovo. There were no phones or internet or anything like that. So I went to where she lived and found her and said, would you like to translate again? And she said, yes, I would love to do that. No, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. I went to see her because I'd become friends with her family. And so her father said, can Erblina translate for you again? And I said, well, actually, I'm able to speak a little bit of Albanian now. What would be better would be if I teach Erblina how to teach, and then we can both teach so we can reach more kids. She said, sure, no problem. Then her friends started coming and because there were no schools operating, there was nothing going on, so there was nothing to do. So I had these other teenagers that were coming to me saying, "Can we do what Erblina's doing?" So I ended up with this group of teenagers. And this group of teenagers, we ended up with 40 teenagers. Not that year; it took a few years, but we ended up with 40 teenagers, and we kept going with people coming in and going out. But we kept with 40 teenagers for 10 years, I think.
And this was every summer you did this?
Actually, it went on all year.
Okay.
So in the early years, I would go in the summer and then I would stay until we ran out of money. So I would try to stay for 9 months. The first year I stayed into the winter and I almost died. So I learned that I couldn't be there when it was really cold because you couldn't get warm sometimes. So I had to leave in the winter, but I would go and stay 9 months and I'd come back to America for 3 months and raise money. And then I would go back.
So it became your full-time job then?
Oh, absolutely. It was my full-time job from the minute that we started the foundation. Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't get paid for the first 15 years we did it. We just raised enough to buy my plane ticket to go over there. I lived with local families or volunteer groups. Eventually, one year we were finally able to afford for me to have a place of my own where we could do our training of our volunteers, and that really changed things. And then eventually we rented a whole house, and that was amazing because I would live upstairs and the whole downstairs was for training, and we could have classes with the kids there. We could have training with the volunteers. We could have multiple classes going on the same time. We'd have classes in the stairway, classes in the kitchen. It was the most amazing thing. And we had that house for over 10 years. And so that was.
And when you would go back to America for 3 months, would you then do private tutoring?
No, because all I was doing was raising money.
Okay.
And my teenagers back in Kosovo would teach the classes while I was gone, because every night I taught training for the teenagers, and then the advanced teenagers would teach the new teenagers. And then every day we'd be teaching the kids. And so when I left in the first early years, we'd have like 400 kids in the program. And then I would go home for 3 months and come back, and there'd be like 5 kids in the program because it's hard. I mean, these kids were in high school that were teaching them, you know. We didn't have anybody that was staying in Kosovo as like the director. And then I met this guy, this Kosovar guy named Burham, and he said, I want to be in your program too. And he eventually became our program director, our Kosovo program director. And once he became involved, about 4 years after I'd gotten there, I left one year with about 600 kids, 600 kids, came back and there were 700 kids, because Burham as a young adult was able to really bring everybody together and coordinate and do all of this stuff. Then the longer we did it, our youth volunteers became real leaders where they'd be in charge of all the programs at one school, and then another one would be a leader of all the kids at another school. And I should say, a big part of our program is that we involve the local community. It's all volunteer. So the local schools would let us use their school buildings on Saturday during the school year, and they'd let us use them on weekdays during the summers. And so we would go in the schools, use their buildings. And what I like about that is that the people that ran those schools, they were making a sacrifice for us to be able to give this program to the kids. And I always want our program to be a gift to the country from their own people. Not a gift from me, not a gift from America. I want it to be their program. And so as our program kept going, and one of the things that had happened in Kosovo is that the teachers were one of the main targets. And so as we took our program to different schools in different villages, one of the principals said to us, I've watched your teenagers teach. Would you ask your teenagers to train my school teachers? Because the people that were teaching school weren't trained school teachers. They were just people that survived the war. So then we started doing formal training for the school teachers, and then equipping them with instruments to teach music in their school. And so the whole thing was about empowering Kosovars to make this their program. And that program went on for 14 years. It was absolutely amazing. And by the time we left, we had reached, I want to say, over 15,000 children. It was absolutely amazing. And so
did Maven go like one of the last years?
Yes, she went one of the last years. And by then I was only there for the summers. And what I spent most of my time doing was prepping everything for the rest of the year. So like if we needed a new ukulele book, I'd be writing the ukulele book, writing the penny whistle book, and then every night I was training the volunteers, because the volunteers were doing such a good job. They didn't need me teaching the kids. And I didn't want the kids to think they needed me. I wanted them to respect the teenagers as the teachers. And so yeah, it was the most amazing thing. But early in about 2004, actually, it was probably 2003 was the year when I left and came back and there were more kids. Then I realized I didn't need to be in Kosovo 9 months out of the year. I could go to another country. And so we actually tried to go into Sierra Leone, but that war was not ending, and it wouldn't end, and it wouldn't end, and it wouldn't end. And we had kind of a deadline that we needed to go ahead and get started in another country. And I realized that Northern Ireland was actually the first place I'd ever seen the effects of war on children. I had visited in the early 90s when there were still tanks on the streets, and you got searched going into stores, and people were being put in prison for no reason. And kids, like I've stayed in a youth hostel, and they had to replace the windows all the time because kids were attacking the windows. Kids were being violent because that was all that was there. And I'd never seen children so hardened in their eyes. And so I decided that we should go to Northern Ireland. So we went there and we did a program. And what was unique about our Northern Ireland program was we did programs for Catholics and Protestant kids. Northern Ireland was 95% segregated at that time between Catholics and Protestants. Now it's about 90% segregated, but it's still segregated. So if you lived in a Catholic neighborhood and you had to walk through a Protestant neighborhood, you'd get beat up a lot of times. You had to wear the right clothes, support the right football team, all that kind of stuff. It was a really hard place. My first Christmas, I came home for 2 weeks, and while I was gone, my favorite store got bombed. And then that fall, they bombed all the home repair shops like Lowe's and Home Depot, different names, but their version of that. And what was crazy is that it looked nice, but everyone had so much pressure. And it was very common to have bombs. Like every week there was a bomb threat or a bomb scare, or they found a real bomb. And the funny thing is it became so common. I lived with a local family there that whenever they'd announce a bomb, the first reaction was just, traffic's going to be terrible now. It was never fear. It was just, this is going to inconvenience us. Riots happened pretty much every month, and bombs happened every week. It was really crazy. So what happened was we started with the kids separate, and then we started bringing them together. And it was so amazing. After our first concert, one of the dads said, this is the first time that my daughter, who's Catholic, has ever been friends with a Protestant child. And I didn't think I'd see that in my lifetime. So it was really amazing. And so we kept that program going for a number of years. But what happened is the riots got kind of really busy for a while. There was a time when we had a lot of really great programs going, and the riots were taking over the whole city, and we couldn't hold our programs. And then when we went back, some of the kids couldn't go to our programs because of where they lived. It wasn't safe. And so we had to put things on hold. And then, of course, COVID happened. And so now we have a very small program going on in Northern Ireland, but we're hoping to build it up again and bring the kids together. Right now, what we're doing is we're training teenagers there with the hopes that they'll be able to go into the centers and teach the children and do some bringing together.
Are there still bombs and protests and things going on?
Yeah, there's still, yeah. And I don't know how often the bombs are. They're probably not every week anymore, but there's still riots. And especially in the summer, we could never run a program during the summer there because that's the time when the Protestants build bonfires. Well, I shouldn't call them, shouldn't say it's the Protestants and Catholics, because it's not a religious war. It's the Republicans who want Ireland to be part of the Republic of Ireland, and the loyalists who want Northern Ireland to be part of Britain. So it's not about religion. It's not religious at all. It's, again, just labels, right? And so
I remember the Irish Republican Army was
Yeah.
the IRA was the big, I guess at the time, terrorist group or whatever in the 70s.
Yeah, it was labeled a terrorist group, but depending on who you talk to, if you were in Northern Ireland and you were Catholic,
they were the heroes.
You would have called the British military the terrorist group. So there was never real news coverage given to what really happened. And it's really sad. There were horrible things that happened on both sides, yeah. And so, but it was really bad.
So what other countries or areas have you served?
So we started a program in Uganda around the same time we started our program in Northern Ireland, and that was during the time when there was the Lord's Resistance Army that were fighting up in the north of Uganda, and they were kidnapping children and forcing them to be soldiers. And no one knows exactly how many children got kidnapped. The number's probably around 30,000. Everybody kept hoping that they would come back. And what happened is, as they would go into a village and kidnap the children, and the government, instead of saying we'll go in and protect these villages, they said just move into camps. So they had people build their own IDP camps, which were just homes made of mud, where they had to cook outside and have thatch for a roof, and the homes were super close together. So all the time, every time I was there, I would see at least a quarter of a camp with plastic tarps because they had caught fire and lost their roofs. And so people were living in these camps. And during this time, 1,000 people were dying every week in the camps because they didn't have enough food and they didn't have enough water. And there were politicians that were trying to discourage people from going into the camps, even though they didn't feel safe in their villages. And so they didn't want to make the camps too nice. And so those camps were really horrible. And, I told you about that first camp I worked in Kosovo that was 350 people. The first camp I worked in Uganda had 70,000 people living in that camp. It was so overwhelming, so crazy, so sad. But the reception to our program was absolutely amazing. And we went in like we try to always do. We found a group of teenagers. We taught the teenagers not living in the camp, but living in the town, that were going to a local high school that had been like kind of cobbled together because they were living in villages that weren't safe anymore. And so they were like sleeping at the school. And so we went in and we started training them, and then we'd take them out to the camp and teach the kids together. And well, actually that came second. First, it was just Burham and I would go out to the camp with a Ugandan lady that would translate for us. And it was so funny. I remember the very first time that we went, we go into this big room that the camp had given us, and we're in the middle of the room playing our guitars and teaching the kids some songs. And then more kids keep coming, and more kids come, and mothers come, and more kids come, and mothers come. And we ended up in the back corner, completely surrounded by the kids on all sides. There were kids looking in all the windows. They were, again, just holes in the wall. And there was maybe a foot between us and the kids. And then I would say there were at least 400 kids in those first classes. And it was so awesome. We have videos of that on our website if anyone wants to look at those. It was so much fun. And then the next year is when then we were able to take our teenagers out and have them start teaching the kids. And I'll tell you something, when I teach a class, a lot of people will come no matter what country it is. Either they want to meet an American or a white person or whatever, right? It's an interesting, different thing. But when my teenagers take over the classes, it doesn't matter what country it is. It doesn't matter what language they speak, what religion they are. All of a sudden our program becomes cool because teenagers are cool all over the world. And for a child to have a teenager be their teacher is the most powerful thing. To have a teenager who's not forced to help the child because their mom's making them, but because they want to spend their spare time learning how to play an instrument and then learning how to teach an instrument, and then even more spare time doing further training and writing reports so that they can continue to teach new volunteers and more children. It's an amazing thing. And
that's pretty awesome.
I can say, I'm really sorry this happened to you, but if I'm a teenager that actually has lived through the same war as you, it's a totally different experience. I don't know why I keep saying that word. It's a totally different experience. And it's very, very powerful. And I feel like we were so blessed. I wanted to be like the other programs that had lots of money and were doing all these amazing programs, but they only lasted 1 year. They had, multi-million-dollar programs for the kids, but they were in Kosovo for 1 year and then they left. We were there for 14 years. And we empowered all these teenagers who almost 100% of them went to university. They are now working, they're professionals, they're parents, they're absolutely amazing. Anyway, I keep going back to Kosovo. So then then we went to Greece when the Syrian refugee crisis was going on, and we were working in a couple of the camps there. And one of the main groups that we worked with are the Yazidi refugees. They're from Iraq, and the Yazidis were the #1 target of ISIS. They've had 74 genocides since and it's a really interesting people. They're an ancient religion. They're a combination of Zoroastrianism, Islam, and Christianity. And they're some of the most peaceful people I've ever known in my life. They're just amazing people. They come from Iraq, or at least that's where they've been. And they then were able, whoever could, was able to escape and went to Turkey. And then they were able to come into Greece. And they couldn't live in the same camps as the Muslims because the Muslims had been being told by ISIS that they needed to kill the Yazidis. So the Yazidis were in a separate camp. Now it's more mixed up, but in the early days, they had to be kept separate for safety. So one of the camps I worked in was with these Yazidis, and it was such an amazing thing to be able to work with them. And the other camp was Syrians and Afghans and eventually people from Africa and all kinds of countries that had fled into Greece to get away, and mostly to save their children, because that's the main reason that you become a refugee, is to protect your children, and because you are unable to do it in your own country. And so you make this huge sacrifice, give up everything, give up every aspect of control of your life so that you can protect your children. And that's the same for so many of the people that come across our border, our southern border as well. And I wish we would see them that way, especially these people that are escaping gang violence and things that have happened to their family. Anyway, so the program in Greece went on until COVID, and then we had to stop going into Greece. But luckily, we had youth volunteers there, and so they were able to continue the program. The hardest thing working with youth volunteers in a refugee camp is that the goal for them is to leave the camp and to go to another country. So they got to leave and to go to Germany, most of them. Then when COVID hit, one of them actually got in touch with me. I'd put up a post on Facebook saying, we're all going to be stuck at home for 2 months with COVID. I think we all thought it was going to last like 2 months, right? So I said, I'll teach a free ukulele class online to anyone who wants to come. Well, she saw that I did that, and she wrote me and she said, Liz, we have internet in Germany. If I can get all of us together, would you teach a class to the Yazidis that are refugees in Germany now? And I said, absolutely. So she organized that class. It was absolutely amazing. They are refugees that lived all over Germany, and they hadn't seen each other in forever. So it was as much a reunion as it was a class. And that went on for years. And then she said, I would like to reach out to some of the Yazidis that are still living in the IDP camps in Iraq that never got to leave. And so she single-handedly started that class. I helped in the beginning, but this girl, Asifa, kept it going and taught this whole group. And we're hoping that we're going to be able to get them into the IDP camp to teach the children. That's in the works right now. But one of the exciting things about Asifa, our amazing German student, so she's 23 now, but she's just graduated high school this year, because what happens to teenagers is that they aren't allowed to go to school when they're going through all of this. So they lose a lot of years. And the only way for them to be able to really go forward in life, or at least to be able to be a professional and have a good living, is to go on to school. So they have to finish high school, public high school, even though they're much older. And it's hard for them. So she just graduated high school. She's going to university this fall. But last summer, she came to Poland to help us work with the Ukrainian refugees. And she's coming again this summer to work with us in Poland. And she's trying to get a program going in Greece as well for us. So she's just amazing. Asifa's phenomenal. And then our last program is in Bangladesh. And luckily, we started in Bangladesh a few years before COVID hit. And Bangladesh at least at the time when we started it, it was the third poorest country in the world. It has the largest refugee camp in the world with the Rohingya refugees. The Rohingya are from Myanmar, which used to be Burma. They are Muslim and they were not allowed to go to school. So they're all illiterate. The men were not allowed to wear pants. They had to wear a wraparound. The people had no rights. And then in the end, it got so bad that the women and girls were all being raped, and they had to do everything they could to leave. So they left and they walked across water, and they finally got to Bangladesh, and the Bangladeshi people gave them this spot for a camp. This camp's been here for a long time. At its height, it had 1.6 million people living in it. They're clay structures that have a number of people living in different sections of them. It is not nice. They're not allowed to work. They're not allowed to leave the camp. It's really, really hard. And in the early days, international groups were allowed to go in and run programs and do things. But then as things progress, as they do with politics and other things, they started limiting that. And eventually they made it so that only Bangladeshi people were allowed to go into the camp. So while I'd started going out to the camp and teaching some classes of children, then they made this rule. But when I first went, that very first trip, we always partner with a local organization, and the local organization came to me and said, Liz, we love that all these groups are helping the Rohingya so much, but our people are so poor. We have so many people living on the street. We have so many people living in abject poverty. Is there any way you could also do a program for our people? So during the time when I wasn't allowed to go to the camp, I was training Bangladeshi teenagers and young adults to teach in a local Bangladeshi school. And so we got this really strong program going in a Bangladeshi school, and then an orphanage, and then a program for street children, and then all these other things. And then the camp opened, they opened up to us. It took more than a year for us to get access. I still only can visit it 3 times a year, like 3 individual visits. And even that is really hard to get. But my Bangladeshi kids, they can go all the time. And so we go out to that camp every week, 2 times a week. It's a 3-hour drive each way to get to the camp. And these teenagers, it takes all day. And it's hard to drive a long distance in Kosovo, in Bangladesh. The roads are really bad, and it's hot, and it's muggy, and it's everything's dusty. They go out there. It takes all day long. They go out there and they teach. And we teach in 2 different camps. So the camp, the Rohingya camp is divided into 100 different sections, might even be more than 100 now. And so we're given permission to teach one camp, another camp, and then we're trying to grow it into more camps and more camps. But kids will come from other areas into the program. And our Bangladesh program is our best program. Because we have an adult who runs our program there. And that's really the key. That was how Kosovo was able to be so amazing without me. Bangladesh is amazing without me. Bangladesh really doesn't need me anymore. I can go every once in a while to do training, but they are so amazing, and they are doing such a phenomenal job. They have trained 4 entire groups of new volunteers without me. We've expanded to have 2 groups of volunteers in 2 completely different areas of Bangladesh that are teaching children in 2 different areas in multiple locations, and they did it all without me. They're just amazing.
Yeah, and you're leaving for Poland pretty soon?
Yeah, 4 days. I leave Monday morning for Poland, and I'll be there until the end of the summer, and then hopefully I'm going to Greece from there to start our program there. But the hard thing about running a program in Europe is that Americans only get 90 days at a time in Europe. And so I have to count my days and make sure that that I can only, if I can give 60 days in Poland, then I still have 30 days left for Greece. And then I have to wait 60 more days, 90 more days before I can go back. So it makes it tricky when you're going between the 2 countries. But yeah, it's exciting. Our program with the Ukrainian refugees is so important, and they're really being forgotten. Uh, Life has changed for them so much in just the 4 years. And initially they were welcomed with open arms into Poland, and Polish people made all kinds of sacrifices for these people. They opened up their homes, they gave them strollers, they worked in soup kitchens. Every taxi I've ever taken, anytime, every Polish person I've ever met tells me stories of what they did or what their family did to help the Ukrainian refugees when this first started. It was amazing, and that went on for years.
And now they're growing weary.
They're growing weary. The government was giving funding for the Ukrainian refugees, and governments changed. Now they're not giving any funding for it. So the centers that the refugees could live in are now all closed. And so everybody's spread out, which makes it really hard to get together for programs. If they're all living in a center, it's great because you have all the kids there for the programs. This is our first summer since all the centers were closed. And so it's going to be a really interesting experience. And I'm just praying that we think we're going to reach more children this summer because of that, but it's much more complicated and more difficult, and a lot more Polish people have to be involved in helping us to get these kids.
So we'll have links in the description to some of the things that you mentioned.
Yes.
And you're still taking donations?
We need them like crazy. We really do. Yeah.
If anybody knows someone out there that can help, or every little bit counts, right?
And one of the neatest things about our organization is that we don't have any overhead. That's really nice. I didn't get paid for the first 15 years. I have been paid for the last 10 years, but I get paid less than a school teacher in America. And even that was hard for me to agree to do, but I'm older now. You got to have, some money and stuff, but I wish I didn't. I actually loved it more when I got to just work for free. But yeah,
we utilize a lot of volunteers, and so that's
yes.
a good
Yes.
system too.
Our goal in every country is to have the locals run the program. And in Poland, we have Polish volunteers and we have Ukrainian volunteers. And I meet with our Ukrainian volunteers every Saturday during the school year. And then they help teach the children during the summer.
And we'll do at least a part 2. We'll have Maven back, and we'll have Maven talk about her training. Great. And about her experience there. And we'll have you able to talk about what you thought about Maven, and see what kind of a show we get out of that. And great. It was big for Maven. I know it was. We did a show a year and a half ago, and I said something that she thought was brilliant, I'll just say, and it had to do with how people learn. And she said, I participated in a program where music was used to help people learn. And so it was very impactful to Maven, and she really
that makes me so happy. That really makes me happy because we use music as a tool, but it's not our goal. Our goal is not to create amazing musicians. Our goal is for these children to realize how amazing they are, so that they can make choices about their future, because choices have been taken away from their families. Once you become a refugee, you have no choice. We want these kids to know that they have the power to make their own choices and to choose peace and to choose negotiations and talking. And we do a lot of talking about skills and getting together with other groups and what it takes to be not just peaceful, but a peacemaker. Our goal is for all of our kids to become instruments of peace.
There you go. Well, thanks a lot again for sharing your story. And I know it got darker and darker there. And
yeah, sorry about that.
We just wanted everybody to know that you could use donations to pay for electricity bills. No, I'm just kidding.
Please, no, to pay for rent on a place in Ukraine or in Poland, and we will go into Ukraine once it opens. Yeah, to pay for our musical instruments, to pay for the books that we produce ourselves for the kids. You have a lot of printing costs. And,
oh yeah, and have you done other interviews, or is there any other like a documentary or anything done about your work or anything like that?
Yes, I've done some other podcasts. There actually was a radio program where some journalists came to Kosovo, like one of the early years I was there, and they did this amazing radio program that won won a big award, the Kennedy Award, I think it was. I don't remember. Ethel Kennedy gave it, and it was really awesome. I mean, I didn't receive the award. The journalists that put it together, but they not only interviewed me, but they recorded our kids singing and playing instruments, and then they met with the parents, the moms, and the school teachers we were training. It's amazing. It's on our website if you want to listen to it. It's
Okay.
really in depth, and it's called The Pied Piper of Kosovo.
There you go. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great rest of the 2025. Like, subscribe, and share, and do all the things. And we'll see everybody next time.
All right. Take care.